Hello and welcome to Nintendo Everything. My name is Eric Zach, and who am I joined by today?
Jonas from Gears for Breakfast.
So first of all, thank you for joining me today, Jonas. Your latest game, A Hat in Time, is on its way to the Nintendo Switch, and I have a bunch of questions that I want to go over with you. But before we get into them, I kind of want to ask you a bit of an icebreaker here. So why don't you tell me and everyone else, what is your favourite game?
My favorite game is probably Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door, if I had to pick one.
You know, it's very funny you to say that because at the start of me actually starting my stuff for Nintendo Everything, that was my favourite game as well. So we have that in common.
That's cool. Yeah, it's a good game.
I think we're definitely going to have to sit down and have a conversation about that one day. But we're here to talk about your game. So tell me, you started development on A Hat in Time in 2012 and released in 2017. What was that 5-year period like, and how much did the game change along the way?
It was quite a difference because we started out just making A Hat in Time as like students who didn't really know anything about how to make games, and so we sort of learned along the way. And you can tell that, you know, if you compare the early Kickstarter video to A Hat in Time's final, that a lot has changed, right? It's not only has the quality skyrocketed, also like the game itself has taken on a completely different form in a good way. This is the final product and it's actually for people to enjoy kind of way.
You said you were a student when you were just learning when you first started. How actually old were you back then when you started?
That's a good question. I think it was in my early 20s.
I wish I was working on something so important in my early 20s. Now, you described A Hat in Time as a GameCube love letter. Where exactly did that inspiration come from? And what made you pursue creating a 3D platformer?
Yeah, so back when I started making A Hat in Time, the latest Mario game was sort of Mario Galaxy, right? And so I love Mario 64 and Mario Sunshine a lot. I thought those games take an interesting approach on sort of like this open level kind of feel. And I wanted something similar, but I could tell that the Mario franchise was going in a different direction. So I felt, the only way to sort of relive that is to try it on my own, right? I just set out to create something that would feel very much like, you know, not only Mario Sunshine, but also Psychonauts and Wind Waker and Banjo-Kazooie, without feeling like you're just playing a bootleg version of those games, right? So for A Hat in Time, you know, that was our foundation, but we took a lot of different approaches to how we do things. I think that has paid off immensely. No one would really say that A Hat in Time is close to either, you know, Mario 64 or Sunshine, but it definitely, you can tell that the inspirations are there, but it does its own thing in an interesting way. I think that was really difficult to do, but I'm really happy with the final result.
Beautiful. All the names that you're grabbing there are all names that just stand out to me as like some of my favourite games of all time. So I'm definitely happy about that. If you could go back until 2012, Jonas, one thing that isn't the winning lotto numbers, what would it be?
Oh, that's a good question. That's a very good question. I think, so personally, I do programming and game design at Gears for Breakfast. So for me, it would be a lot in how we design A Hat in Time. The design for A Hat in Time has changed so much. In the beginning, it was just sort of like, you're going from one place to another. That's gameplay, right? But that's completely not what A Hat in Time is today. It's more about making players engaged with not only the environment, but also the characters. In fact, characters play a huge role in A Hat in Time, where each level is sort of designed around a specific character. So if I could, I would bring all that knowledge back to me. And also maybe just, you know, being indie is weird, right? Because in one way you have to be very close to people and people expect you to sort of respond to their things, right? Like how far is the game, etc. And that's fine. But when you get, so Hat in Time has gotten kind of big, and when you get kind of as big as we have gotten, there's a changing idea in how you should communicate with your fans as well. And that's something we sort of learned along the way, that the bigger A Hat in Time got, people wanted, like, they didn't want as much of the indie approach anymore. They wanted more like a professional approach. And that was an interesting change for us. And I would love to take that knowledge back to me.
Yeah, no, I can totally understand that. Like starting from the start there from scratch, you know, obviously you had no idea how big it was going to get and how much it was going to blow up.
Yeah, exactly. It was, you know, when you're starting out just being a student, you think, this is just, a side thing I'm working on for fun. But eventually A Hat in Time crossed into a point where it was a game that people cared about. And it took me a long time to realize that, people actually have a big investment into what I'm creating. That's huge. And that took me a long time to realize. I thought having that knowledge earlier would have been very interesting, at least.
Yeah, well, that kind of transitions to my next question here, because as of July, Hat in Time has sold over 500,000 units. Tell me about your original expectations compared to where the project has kind of ended up today.
Yeah, 500,000 units is insane, by the way.
I know, I can't believe it. Like, wow, well done, first of all.
Thank you. We had no expectations to get that much. Most indies are just looking to break even, right? Like, we just hope that we can continue to make the next game. So when we were we were in a meeting at launch, like right when I hadn't time launched, and we were talking to each other, and we were saying, oh, if we can just break even, like if we can match our Kickstarter budget, that would be all we would need, right? And so we said, okay, if we get like 9,000 sales to match our Kickstarter budget, that would be outstanding, right? And then we make 500,000 sales. it blew our minds.
I actually do remember reading something about when you first started development, and this is obviously before you probably even got into like very far in development at all. You were wondering whether like how you're going to sell the game, or whether you're going to sell for like I think I read something about $1 each. Is that true?
As I said earlier, it took me a really long time to realize that Hat in Time was something people cared a lot about. So when I started out as a student project, it was just sort of like, oh, I'll sell this on itch.io or whatever, right? I didn't think very many people would care about the project, but it turns out that a lot of people do care. So we were able to scale it up and make it this huge game. Like, Hat in Time is huge. It takes like 10 hours minimum to complete the game. So, and the new DLC adds like a lot more hours to that as well. So we've been able to, in fact, I would make the claim that in the new DLC, not many people are going to be able to finish that. There's so much content, and it's very difficult.
Oh wow, I'm even more excited to play it then. In fact, just for a little bit of inside information here, the new DLC is actually launching today as we're doing this interview. Of course, the interview won't be up till later, but you must be very excited about that.
Yeah. It's very cool. It's something we've been working on for a while, and the quality is very high in this DLC. It's really something. It shows that we have grown a lot as a studio, and the new Death Wish mode that's arriving with the DLC, that's going to add a lot of hours. I don't want to put a number on it, but I would anticipate. I will make the expectation, I will anticipate that no one is going to complete Death Wish in like a month period. Would be my guess.
Oh, really? I hate putting that challenge on gamers, because you know what they're like. Like, they speed run games, they get through them in completely unexpected times. But I'd be really interested to see people how fast they can kind of get through this.
Yeah, there's just so much content, and it requires you to be very skilled. So, in fact, during development, we had such a hard time playtesting Death Wish because there was so much content. It was so difficult that we had to bring in multiple playtesters, and we had to like turn on easy mode for them to be able to complete it. It's quite something different.
Well, just to run it back into the Switch, Gears for Breakfast previously said that Hat in Time wouldn't be released, on Switch. What changed over the past few months to make that possible after all?
Yeah, so, the Switch appeared kind of mid-development at Hat in Time, right? And it was, at that time, it was kind of too late to add on our platform, if you know what I mean? Because you have to design the entire game to fit the platform. If you don't design around it, you're going to have performance problems and other issues as well. So that made it more difficult. At that time, we'd been working on Xbox One and PlayStation 4 for a while. And so those were ready for launch. And so after we had shipped ahead in time on consoles, we were looking at the Switch and we were seeing, okay, we tried this before and it is an immense amount of work, right? Because it's an entirely new piece of hardware. The tools are all new. There's nothing carried over from the Wii U. The engine we're using doesn't support it at all, period. The engine we're using is Unreal 3, and that's obviously not Unreal's fault. The system didn't exist at the time, so that's expected. But it meant we had to integrate support for new hardware in an old engine. And it's not just an old engine, it's also a AAA engine that has a lot of different routes and everything, right? Which makes it more difficult. That was a huge undertaking for us. It's not something we would have been able to do just ourselves. And that's why we were very clear in saying, no, it's not coming to Switch, right? Because at that time, we had dropped all hope. We were looking at it and we had so many issues and it was just way out of our expertise. It's very different being indie and being a AAA studio, because a AAA studio has senior programmers and developers who are expertise in these kind of things. But that's not what an indie studio is, right? So we had dropped all thoughts of it, and we were thinking, okay, this is never happening, right? We're giving up. Then we were approached by Humble, who published the Xbox One and PlayStation 4 version of A Hat in Time. And they said, okay, we might have found some developers who might be able to assist you in this. And we were thinking, oh, that's not going to go anywhere, right? We had very low hopes for it, just because we knew how big of a task it is. And I think we'll probably talk more about the process at launch as well. But these developers, they gave us such an immense help that we would never have anticipated before. Like, we were able to get a lot of it running. The easiest thing in porting is actually to get something to run. That's the easy part. That takes like a week or two, right? That's trivial. Getting things run correctly and getting them to run with good performance, that's the hard part. That's the hard part that takes a long time. Because what runs well on PC, for instance, that doesn't run well on consoles. Consoles rely on a strong GPU, while PCs rely primarily on the CPU, which means that you have to sort of redesign the entire code base to offload a lot of work onto the GPU. And that's a non-trivial task. That's not something you just do. It's not a flick of a button, right? It takes a lot of man hours. It takes a lot of expertise, and it's way out of the scope for an indie team. So we got some assistance from some developers who are more expertise than us, and they were able to assist us in getting it up and running on the Switch. And that was just immensely useful. We had never been able to do that. So I realize now we look quite the fool that we said no, and now it's a yes. And I think that's also just ties into us evolving as developers.
I say we did kind of touch on that earlier, that like you struggled at the start there from jumping from just a very small indie team to all of a sudden you're in the big boys now, playing in that water, and you've just got to figure this out. And so obviously there's going to be teething problems and things that you learned along the way. So I think everyone can kind of understand that.
Yeah, in the beginning we were just being very direct, like saying, okay, it's coming to this and this, not this and this, right? And cool. I think that works if you have a small audience, but in our case, us saying it's coming to this and this and not that resulted in headlines on like blog sites, right? And when you're that big, that's probably not the message to make. So that's my one regret. No, but I think I can talk a bit more, because I know it's when you see a game that you really want to play, but it's not on platforms that you have, right? Everyone has that situation. Not everyone has every console, so that's understandable. But I think it's unreasonable to sort of demand that indie teams bring the games over to every console. Just because, as I said earlier, like, we don't have the expertise, and even if we wanted to, it's not part of our skill set, sadly. Unfortunately, a large part of the indie community relies on what the big boys make their indies available to, right? So if Unity supports Switch, then Unity games might arrive on Switch, right? But if it doesn't, then there's no games arriving for Switch. And so I think that's something to keep in mind, that, we're not as big as the big boys, so we can't really make big boy changes.
Yeah, of course. Now, while we're talking about the engine, Hat in Time was obviously built in Unreal Engine 3, and thus far we haven't seen many games that have been created with that technology that have come to the Switch. What needed to be done to ensure that A Hat in Time would work well on the Switch? And are you working with any external developers, which I think you mentioned earlier was Humble Bundle?
Yes, that's correct. I think we'll talk more about this at launch. But yeah, Humble helped us connect with some very good developers that allowed this to happen. And it's been weird because Unreal 3 is kind of old at this point. And there's been so many changes in technology in these last few years that it's been kind of crazy upgrading A Hat in Time to meet all these new requirements for like visual fidelity, etc. In fact, we have this unique technology in A Hat in Time called box projected cube maps. It's something we use to like fake the interiors of buildings, and in fact, you might have seen it in the latest Spider-Man game as well. Uh, it's something entirely new, and it is a challenge to bring something that is actually very simple to implement into an old engine. New ideas into old engines is not a good mix, but it's been interesting and very insightful and a learning experience to upgrade the engine Unreal Engine 3 and allow it to not only run on modern systems but also run with modern fidelity.
Speaking of modern fidelity, are you targeting any particular frame rate and resolution in both docked and undocked modes?
Yes, both are 720p, 30 FPS, and so we have been we don't want to compromise in the experience we're bringing to the Switch, and so we tried as much as we can to make sure that the visual fidelity and the gameplay matches as close to the other releases as possible, right? And so since A Hat in Time is designed for PC, which has much, you can upgrade your PC, so there's a chance that people might have better hardware on PC just because they can purchase new PC. They don't have to wait for a new console to come out. So Hat in Time has been designed for a bit stronger hardware on PC. But we didn't want to compromise on the Switch. We want to bring the same experience on Switch as well. And so that's the reason it's 720p and not 1080p. But I think it still looks very good and very sharp. But yeah, it's been a challenge to bring it over, but I'm really happy with the final result as well. We use in terms of resolution, in handheld mode, we use an implementation similar to Mario Odyssey and Breath of the Wild as well, where the resolution sort of changes a bit to make sure that the frame rate stays stable. It's called dynamic resolution, and we use that in handheld mode as well.
Yeah, I have actually heard of that being used. That's fantastic. When did development on the Switch version start, and how far along is the port?
So we started. Well, actually, the Switch version has been sort of on and off for a while, right? Because we tried it and saw, there's no way we can do this, and that was just around launch, I think. And then we got a lot of help. I would say, early this year. Yeah, sometime early this year, maybe a bit later. That's when we started getting a lot of help, and that's when the development of the Switch build really built up. And so right now, the Switch build is looking very good. We're just doing final testing on it, but it might still be a while. I don't want to make any promises on when we're launching, but we are doing testing on it right now and finding all the last remaining issues. We want to make sure that we can make it a good experience right off the bat, right, on day one. We want to make sure that day one is good. So that's why we're doing testing right now.
The latest DLC in A Hat in Time, as we mentioned earlier, is out now on PC and has yet to be announced for the Switch. However, something we're really curious about here is the Nostalgia Badge. Where did the idea for this come from, and how is it implemented in-game?
Yeah, the Nostalgia Badge is interesting. So we know that we have a lot of fans who like to play older games like Mario 64 and Banjo-Kazooie. And so there is a big demand from people to have this sort of mode. In fact, some people would just turn down the settings and go, oh, look, this is retro mode, right? We wanted to try and fulfill that demand in a way that is a bit better, right? And so the way it works is that HatKit gets an entirely new model. So she is just designed from the ground up for this mode. And it's made low poly and has bendable limbs. So on the 64, there weren't bone-based animation, which meant that you set up the bone and the different polygons are sort of skinned to each bone. That's not how it worked on the 64. It was just different limbs that rotated and moved around. And we've managed to mimic that as well in HatKit's model, which was an interesting challenge, but it looks very authentic and very good. So HatKit gets a redesign, and then the environment uses lower detail versions. So the textures are downsampled a lot, right? Because on 64, I think the max texture size you could have is like 64 by 64 pixels. So we wanted to make sure that the environment met those criteria as well. So every texture in the environment has been downsampled a lot. And then lastly, we apply a filter over the screen. If you notice, 64 games are very rarely pixelated. And the reason for that is they actually apply a very slight downsample, which slightly blurs the screen. And we've mimicked that in Hat in Time as well. So every pixel is sort of a bit blurry, but it still looks very authentic and not blurry to the point that will hurt your eyes. It's blurry, but it's still sharp, if that makes sense. And it meets the Nintendo 64's requirement of 24p, right? Or 240p it's called. It meets that resolution. So overall, it feels very authentic.
So you're telling me it'll run on the 64, right?
No. In fact, because we've aimed so much for authenticity, it might actually... some people asked if you'd get better performance running this mode. And the answer is no, because it actually takes a bit more effort to replicate these old methods of doing things. Yeah, technology changes, and sometimes things that are easy in the past are now difficult.
I guess it's not just as easy as putting a slider down and saying, we're done with it now.
No, we wanted to make sure it's authentic and people wouldn't feel like we copped out and just put it on low.
So the Seal the Deal DLC will add a cooperative gameplay where a second player can control, is it Bokid?
Yes.
Seeing as though local co-op is almost unheard of in this collectathon genre, what made you think to implement it, and what hurdles did you have to overcome to make this feature even work?
Yeah, the reasoning is quite simple. We know a lot of people like to play, so especially younger kids, they usually have siblings that like to sit by and watch them play, right? We thought it'd be very cool if both of them could play at the same time without one hindering the other. So in Hat in Time's co-op mode, there's no penalty for having the other player being bad, right? If one of you can progress, then that moves progress further. So yeah, we thought it would be really cool if two players could independently move around in the city and just do things. And I think we've achieved that. It was very difficult, actually. Rendering the same environment twice in split screen is very costly. So it took us a lot to get performance to a level where that would run at 60 FPS, but it runs super well now. But yeah, performance was a big concern, and then making sure that the entire game works in co-op was also a non-trivial task. But we're really, really happy with the result, and it's very cool being able to, like, one player goes to one side of Mafia Town, the other player goes to the other side of Mafia Town, and they're like 2 kilometers apart. That's a very cool feeling.
Me and my partner always play games together, so it's definitely a feature that I would really, really get into.
Yeah, I highly recommend it. You can play the entire campaign, Mafia Town, Subcon, Battle of the Birds, etc. You can play this entirely in co-op.
I think I'm going to have to. Another question I have is this new DLC going to be it for A Hat in Time? Or will you be supporting the game even further with more content?
Yes. So this DLC took us a long time to make because we wanted to make sure that we get our very first DLC right. This is new territory for us, and we haven't tried something like this yet. In fact, the fact that the DLC is free on PC on launch is also an entirely new concept for us, and we're trying it out, seeing how people respond to that. But after Seal the Deal, we have one more DLC planned, and that DLC is still in development. It's not quite far along yet, but we're excited for people to try that as well. And that'll include stuff like a new chapter and also other unannounced things.
So it's going to be is it going to be another large DLC then, by the sounds of it?
We'll have to see. It really depends what you mean by large, but I think it'll definitely be a worthwhile DLC. I think people will, just like how people are loving Death Wish and the Arctic Cruise, I think people are really going to love the next DLC as well. But making these DLCs is a lot of effort. It takes a lot of time from us. I mean, it's almost been a year since A Hat in Time launched, so clearly it takes a while to make these.
Wow, a year, that's gone by.
Yeah, it's been fast. It takes a while for us to make them. We have to put our full focus towards them.
Well, so there's still a lot going on between A Hat in Time's DLC and the new Switch version. That being said, have you given any thought as to the studio's next game? And would you want to work on a sequel in the future?
After the DLC, we're going to take a break from A Hat in Time, I think. I think A Hat in Time is very cool, and we want to try. Actually, I would love to make a Hat in Time too, right? But I'm so fatigued from 3D platformers that I want to take a break. But that'll make it even more exciting when a Hat in Time 2 eventually rolls around, to see how much has changed between now and in the future when the game releases. But we're actually working on our second game right now. We're working on it in conjunction with DLC 2. And the next game is going to be a completely different ballpark. It'll be very interesting. Because a Hat in Time is very cute and it's a platformer game, right? But the next title we're working on is nothing like that at all.
I remember with A Hat in Time when you first announced that was going to be a thing. Obviously, you were trying to recreate the collectathon genre. Not to spoil what the genre of this new game is, but have you kind of gone with another unique idea that you would like to bring back, or is it something completely different?
It's a mix. I think there's some games in the past that are very underrated that I would like to bring sort of back, right? But it's going to be mixed with new ideas and new concepts.
Well, I look forward to playing Paper Mario 1000 Year Door 2.
I would love to make a 1000 Year Door 2. That would be my dream project. But that's not what we're making, sadly.
So A Hat in Time used Kickstarter to fund the project. And since you saw such a massive success with that platform, is that something you would consider using again?
I think Kickstarter is a very good platform, and we enjoyed it a lot for A Hat in Time. And in fact, we're really blessed with our backers being so understanding that the game came out a little later than we had anticipated, just because the game got so big. I think now that we're capable of self-funding titles, I doubt we'll return to Kickstarter. But I think that's also a good thing, because we're leaving more space for other up-and-comings to make a splash in the Kickstarter scene. We don't really want to take any fund away from anyone who's looking to make the next new game, right? So it's not going to be Kickstarter, but maybe in the future, who knows?
What else would you like fans to know about the Switch version of A Hat in Time, or the game in general?
That's a good question. I would say, what would I say? I guess I would say that we put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into making the Switch port, and I really hope you'll enjoy it. And I hope you'll appreciate that it stays so close to the PC release in terms of like quality, because that has been hard. That's been quite the challenge. But we're excited about bringing A Hat in Time to a new platform. Not only is it like, it's not just a new platform, right? It's completely different control scheme. How you play on the Switch is completely different. It's the first time A Hat in Time is on the go. So that's insane and exciting as well. So yeah, I hope fans will enjoy it. It's been a lot of work.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Jonas. I really appreciate you coming and having a chat with us and opening up about A Hat in Time. But before we go, please tell fans where they can follow you and your team's work.
Yes, you can follow us on twitter.com/ahatintime and facebook.com/ahatintime.
All right, well, thank you again, Jonas. I can't wait for A Hat in Time to come out into the Nintendo Switch. And for everyone else, thank you for tuning in. And remember, for everything Nintendo, stay tuned to Nintendo Everything.